You see, my friends, most people imagine that spiritual awakening is some kind of grand achievement, a prize at the end of a very long road. They think of it as adding something to themselves, a sort of final upgrade to the ego, enlightenment as the ultimate status symbol. But awakening, if we may use that tricky word at all, is not an addition. It is not a prize, nor is it a possession. It is, in fact, a subtraction, a gradual, sometimes shocking discovery that there was never anyone to possess anything in the first place. It's rather like searching your whole house for a thief, only to find there was no thief, only your own shadow moving in the candlelight. The ego, you see, is that shadow. It looks terribly real until you reach out to grab it. Then it vanishes, and what you're left with is not a void, but a vast and wordless awareness that was there all along, watching the game unfold. Now, the beginning of awakening is not the beginning of bliss. It's the beginning of disillusionment, which is to say, the beginning of seeing through the illusion. To disillusion is not to make one miserable. It is to remove the lens of falsehood that distorted the view. But the ego, poor thing, has invested so heavily in its stories that truth feels like death. It whispers, "Without me, who will you be? Without the mask, what face remains?" And so, the great paradox of the spiritual path, you set out to find yourself, but what you find first is the slow and certain crumbling of the self you thought you were. The edges of identity begin to blur. The roles you've played, the achiever, the lover, the seeker, begin to lose their solidity. And you notice, sometimes with terror, that the ground beneath you is not ground at all, but sky. Boundless, directionless, free. You begin to sense that all your efforts to become better, holier, wiser, all your anxious self-improvements were, in their way, the ego's clever disguise to keep itself going. Even the search for awakening can become another mask. The seeker becomes the sought, chasing its own tail in the name of salvation. It's like trying to bite your own teeth, and when this is seen clearly, something rather peculiar happens. There is laughter, not the laughter of ridicule, but the deep belly laughter of recognition. The cosmic joke begins to dawn. All this time, you were running in circles inside a dream of me. You were polishing the image of a phantom. The race was never real, yet the running was so convincing, so sincere. So the beginning of the end of you is precisely this: the dawning suspicion that you were never there to begin with. Not in the way you thought. You are not the solid lump of thoughts and worries and memories that you habitually identify as yourself. You are the awareness in which all those passing clouds appear and disappear as effortless as breathing, as ungraspable as wind. And yet, this realization is not an annihilation. It is liberation. For when the you begins to fade, life begins to shimmer. Every sound, every color, every breath appears fresh, astonishing, new. You discover that existence does not depend on an identity to justify it. The world does not need your name to be beautiful. So, my friends, the first step toward awakening is not stepping anywhere. It is the quiet, curious recognition that the one who thought he was walking the path is himself the illusion. And when that illusion starts to crack, do not be alarmed. It is not the end of life. It is the end of the dream of separation, the soft beginning of seeing things as they are, not as you imagined them to be. You see, the curious thing about the ego is that it isn't evil. It isn't even wrong. It's simply mistaken, a magnificent misunderstanding, an exquisite illusion. It's the masterpiece of the universe's game of hide and seek. The universe hides from itself by pretending to be you, and then spends a lifetime trying to find itself again. What a performance! What a show! But let us look at what this you really is. From the moment you were born, people began telling you stories. They told you your name, your gender, your nationality. They told you what was good, what was bad, what to fear, what to desire. And slowly, with each word, you began to weave a mask, a face that the world could recognize. This is me, you said. This is who I am. Yet, if you look closely, you'll see that this mask is made of words. And words are only sounds in the air, noises we agree to take seriously. The self you defend so passionately is nothing more than a narrative stitched together from memory, habit, and imagination. It's a story told by thoughts, about thoughts, to other thoughts. And because everyone else seems to believe their story, you felt obliged to believe yours too. We spend our lives polishing this story. We decorate it with achievements, relationships, possessions, and opinions. We build reputations around it, protect it from criticism, and feel wounded when someone questions it as if a mere sentence could be injured. We suffer heartbreaks when others fail to read the script we secretly wrote for them. And we call this suffering life. But the ego's illusion is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a dance to be seen through. The play was always meant to be convincing. After all, what fun is hide and seek if you find yourself immediately? The cosmic drama needed a convincing actor. And so, consciousness invented the mask of me. Now, this is where the trouble begins. Because the mask, being unaware of its own artificiality, starts to take itself seriously. It forgets it was ever a performance. It begins to fear being unmasked, fear its own impermanence. And in that fear, it builds walls, beliefs, judgments, ambitions, comparisons. I must succeed. I must be loved. I must be someone. The whole thing becomes a kind of spiritual anxiety, the impossible task of keeping an imaginary self alive. Do you see the joke? The ego spends its life trying to prove its own existence. Yet everything it does merely shows how insecure it feels about that existence. It wants to be immortal, yet it's built on what is passing. It wants to be real, yet it's only a thought. The very effort to become somebody creates the feeling of separation that makes us miserable in the first place. And so awakening begins as the gentle recognition that the story isn't the storyteller. You are not the script. You are the silent awareness in which the script appears. The words I, me, mine are little waves on the surface of an ocean, too vast to name. The ocean doesn't disappear when the wave subsides. It simply returns to its natural stillness. To see this clearly is to laugh with relief, not mockery. Because once you understand the illusion, you no longer have to fix it, protect it, or polish it. You can let the mask do its dance without mistaking it for your face. You can play your role in the human comedy fully, beautifully, but lightly. You can love, create, work, and even argue, yet all the while, a quiet part of you knows that it's a play. And this, my friends, is the beginning of real freedom. Not the freedom to become anything, but the freedom to stop pretending to be what you never were. When you see the ego for what it is, a lovely, shimmering mirage, you stop trying to drink the desert dry. You sit down, smile, and finally notice the oasis that was here all along. And so, when the mask begins to slip, the first thing that happens is silence. Not the silence of peace, at least. Not at first, but a silence that feels like the lights have gone out in the theater, and the actor suddenly realizes he is standing alone on the stage. The audience has vanished. The music has stopped. The curtain, it seems, has come down, yet somehow the play has not ended. You see, when the sense of me begins to crack, it is not a pleasant business. The world feels strangely empty. Things that once mattered, status, praise, ambition, even spirituality, lose their meaning. It's as if the compass you've used all your life suddenly points in every direction at once. And in that bewilderment, the mind cries out, I've lost myself. But what has really been lost? Not you, only the idea of you. The character that you played so sincerely. The one who was always trying to be good, to be successful, to be loved, to be enlightened. That character has collapsed under the weight of its own performance. And this collapse, though terrifying, is the very doorway to freedom. Most people imagine that awakening is a smooth ascent into light. But, my friends, it's far more like falling through the floor of everything you thought was real. You discover that your beliefs, your goals, your self-image, all the furnishings of your little house of identity are made of mist. They disappear the moment you reach for them. And the ego, poor thing, begins to panic. It clings to anything solid, even sorrow. Now, this is the moment when many seekers turn back. The experience feels like death, and in a sense, it is. The death of a phantom, the death of the actor who mistook the costume for his skin. But if you can stay with it, if you can resist the urge to rebuild the mask, you will notice something remarkable. Behind the ruin of the me, there is a stillness that does not tremble, a quiet awareness that was never born and never dies. You see, the mind fears this stillness because it cannot control it. It is not a thought. It does not speak in language. It cannot be pinned down or analyzed. It simply is. And yet, this nothing begins to reveal itself as everything. The silence that seems so empty begins to hum with life. You realize that what you took for the end of yourself is, in truth, the beginning of reality as it is. But it is not easy to surrender to this. The mind will try every trick to escape the stillness. It will invent new goals, new philosophies, even new spiritual identities. It will say, I am now the awakened one. But even that is the same old performance, only in more sophisticated costume. You cannot use the ego to destroy the ego. You cannot think your way into silence. So, what do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You simply notice the game. You watch as the I tries to come back through the back door, trying to claim victory over itself. You watch it and you smile. That smile is the first hint of true awakening because it's the moment you stop taking the play so seriously. The character doesn't really die. He's just seen for what he is, a role, a mask, a ripple on the ocean. The ocean never wept when the waves subsided. It simply flowed on. And when this becomes clear, when the panic softens and the silence deepens, something within you begins to laugh softly, perhaps even through tears, because you realize that nothing was ever lost. You were never separate. The actor was never different from the stage. The dance never apart from the dancer. That, you see, is the shattering of the character. It feels like the end, but it is the first crack of dawn. The self that thought it was running the show dissolves, and in its place stands pure awareness, vast, unafraid, and perfectly still. You see, at the heart of the ego's panic lies a very ancient fear, the fear of nothing. The idea that behind all our faces, all our stories, all our striving, there might be no one. That thought terrifies us, doesn't it? For we have been taught since childhood that to be someone is to be safe, and to be nothing is to die. We were told to build ourselves up, build a name, a career, a destiny, and guard it as though it were sacred. But sooner or later, the question creeps in. What happens when the one I'm protecting disappears? And that, my friends, is where true awakening begins to bite. Because when the mask falls, the ego looks into the mirror and finds no reflection. It reaches out, and there is no hand. It shouts into the void, and the void does not answer. That's when the mind trembling, says, "I am nothing," and it thinks that's a tragedy. But here's the cosmic joke. That nothing you're so afraid of is not empty, it's full. Full of everything you ever longed for, but never recognized because you were too busy being someone. The nothingness of which you are afraid is, in truth, the boundless awareness in which every something arises and dissolves. Think of the space between musical notes. Without the silence, there would be no melody, only noise. Yet we fear that silence because we've come to identify with the notes. We want to keep the tune going. Even when the orchestra has finished the song, we say, "Play me again, keep me alive." And so, we fill our lives with noise, chatter, distraction, busyness, to drown out the great quiet that waits patiently beneath it all. We are terrified of stillness because stillness exposes the illusion. When you are quiet enough, you begin to hear the hum of being itself. And that hum has no beginning and no end. It is not your hum or mine. It is the hum, the universe breathing through every form and every formlessness. But of course, the ego cannot survive in that vastness. It feels like a drop of ink dissolving in an ocean. The boundaries blur, and the mind cries out, "If I dissolve, what's left?" And the answer, whispered by the silence, is everything. Everything that ever was or will be. The trees, the stars, the laughter of children, the beating of your heart. You see, the nothingness that frightens you is the womb of existence itself. From it, every joy, every tear, every moment of love arises, and into it all things return, like waves folding back into the sea. The mind calls this nothingness death. But that's because the mind only understands form. It cannot conceive of being without shape, awareness without center. Yet this, precisely, is what awakening reveals, the peace that surpasses understanding, because it is older than thought. Now, to see this clearly, to feel it in your bones, is liberation. But before it feels like liberation, it feels like falling. You feel as though you've lost control, as if you're vanishing into the void. The trick is to let yourself fall, to surrender so completely that the one who is falling disappears. Then, suddenly, you realize there was never any fall at all. There is no bottom, because there is no edge. And in that moment, the fear of nothingness transforms into awe. You discover that what you feared as absence is actually presence, infinite, radiant, indescribable. The space in which all things appear, including the idea of you. So, don't be afraid of nothing. Nothing is what allows everything to be. Without it, even your fears could not exist. The void is not your enemy, it is your true home. And when you realize that, you can finally stop fighting for permanence. You can rest in the impermanence of all things and see that the dance of life needs both sound and silence, both birth and death, both being and non-being. That, you see, is the secret the ego cannot bear, that its end is not the end of life, but the revelation of life itself. And so, when you have faced the great silence, when you've looked into the abyss and found it looking back with your own eyes, a strange and wonderful laughter begins to rise. The kind of laughter that comes not from amusement, but from recognition, because you suddenly see the whole game for what it is, a divine hide-and-seek in which you, pretending to be a separate person, have spent your life trying to find yourself. You see, consciousness has always been playing a trick on itself. It hides behind your name, your face, your history, and says, "I am this." And then after a while it gets tired of the disguise and begins the long journey home. But here's the catch, the journey home was the hiding all along. The seeker was never apart from the sought. The player was never separate from the game. You might imagine life as a great cosmic drama with every creature, every star, every atom performing its part perfectly. And the divine actor, this consciousness, takes on countless roles: the saint and the sinner, the king and the beggar, the child and the dying man. It plays all these parts, not to escape boredom, but to taste experience in every flavor possible. The drama is not a mistake. It's art. It's play, what the Hindus called Leela, the divine play of existence. But here's the punchline. You, the person who thought he was struggling, learning, improving, failing, and seeking, you were never the player. You were the game itself. You were the field on which it all happened. You were the silence between every sound, the stillness behind every motion. You were life pretending to be human. Isn't that astonishing? You sitting there, worrying about success, about enlightenment, about what tomorrow may bring. You were never doing any of it. It was all the universe, in the form of you, exploring itself. Every thought, every emotion, every heartbeat was the cosmos vibrating in one particular pattern and calling that pattern me. And when you see this, all the old striving loses its edge, not because you stop caring, but because you stop clinging. You can dance without trying to control the rhythm. You can laugh without needing to know the reason. You can cry without shame. Life becomes vivid again, not as a mission, but as music. Now, of course, this realization offends the ego terribly. It says, if I'm not the player, then what am I? Just a puppet? But that's still the ego talking, still imagining that there must be someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. There isn't. There's just the dance, just the movement of the universe expressing itself as this moment. And once you understand this, really understand it, not as an idea, but as a living experience, something relaxes deep within you. You stop arguing with life. You stop trying to get to the end of the story, because you realize there is no end. The point of the play is not to finish it, but to play beautifully. You stop looking for meaning as though life were a riddle to be solved, and instead begin to savor it, as you would a song, not to reach the final note, but to enjoy every sound along the way. You see, the universe is not a problem to be solved. It is a symphony to be heard, a painting to be seen, a dance to be danced. And in that laughter, that holy, uncontainable laughter, all your seriousness about being spiritual collapses, because you finally see that even your search for awakening was part of the game. The effort to become enlightened was consciousness pretending to be lost so that it could enjoy the drama of being found. When you grasp this, even slightly, you begin to live lightly. You don't have to renounce the world. You simply see through it. You see that life is not a trap, but a performance, and that every role, even the tragic ones, are played perfectly. You, my friends, are not the actor on the stage. You are the stage itself, vast, silent, and unmoving, upon which the play of time and change dances for a moment and then disappears like mist in the morning sun. And when this truth sinks in, you can't help but smile, because you realize that you were never really in danger, never really lost, never really broken. It was all a marvelous act, and you were the theater in which it was performed. Now, after the laughter fades and the grand joke of it all has settled in, there comes a quiet clarity, a kind of gentle emptiness that is not hollow but spacious. You begin to see that life continues perfectly well without the constant narration of me. There is still the body walking, the eyes seeing, the breath rising and falling, but there is no longer a central character directing the play. The show goes on, as it always has, only now it's free of commentary. And this, my friends, is what I mean by living without a story. You see, for most of your life, Everything that happened was immediately added to your autobiography. You didn't just feel anger, you said, I am angry. You didn't just make a mistake, you said, I am a failure. The mind stitched every event into the fabric of a story about who you are. But when the storyteller falls silent, the threads unravel. The narrative collapses. And what remains is not confusion, but freshness, a world no longer filtered through past and future, guilt and ambition, a world that simply is. Now, many people hear this and say, but surely if I have no story, I'll lose direction. How will I know what to do? And I tell them, you'll know precisely what to do, because life itself will move you. It always has. It's just that before, you thought you were moving it. When you no longer live as the author, you live as the unfolding, and that is far more intelligent, far more spontaneous, far more alive than any plan the ego could ever conceive. It's like a river. The river doesn't have a strategy for how to reach the ocean. It doesn't measure its progress or criticize its curves. It flows, and in flowing, it fulfills its nature. When you stop forcing your story, you discover that you, too, are flowing perfectly, effortlessly, without needing to know where the current leads. Of course, this brings a strange kind of freedom, and with it, a strange kind of loneliness. Because once you stop performing your story, those who still live by theirs may not understand you. They will look for the old script, the predictable lines, the roles they expect you to play, and you won't be playing them anymore. They might say you've changed, that you've grown distant, cold, or mysterious. But you haven't. You've simply stopped auditioning for their drama. You no longer need to justify your piece, and that, you see, can be unsettling to those who still believe their script is real. Yet, there's no judgment in it, only compassion. You remember what it was like to live caught in that story, constantly editing, defending, and rehearsing. You see others doing the same, and instead of trying to correct them, you quietly love them as they are. Because every story, no matter how mistaken, is still a form of the same dance consciousness, pretending to forget itself for the joy of remembering again. Living without a story doesn't mean you stop speaking or acting. It simply means that words and actions arise naturally, without being wrapped in self-importance. You still play your part in the world, you cook, you laugh, you help, you create, but there's no heavy I attached to any of it. It is like music being played without a musician. The notes still sound, but no one is claiming ownership. The melody plays itself. And what's most extraordinary is that life becomes astonishingly simple. Ordinary moments, washing dishes, walking in the rain, listening to the hum of a refrigerator take on a quiet beauty. You realize they were never ordinary at all. It was your story that made them seem so. This is why, when the self disappears, the world becomes radiant. The colors return. The taste of tea becomes vivid. And even silence begins to sparkle. You see that you never needed to become anything to find peace. You simply needed to stop pretending you were ever apart from it. So, my friends, to live without a story is not to lose yourself, but to find that you were never lost. It is to let life tell itself through you, as it always has, without the interference of the narrator, who never truly existed. You become, in the most effortless way, a mirror reflecting the world as it is, unclouded, unpossessed. And in that reflection, life recognizes itself and smiles. You see, when the self begins to dissolve, something very curious happens. You might expect that without the me, life would become cold, mechanical, impersonal. But the opposite is true. When there's no longer anyone to defend, you discover that the whole universe has become your very self. And in that realization, compassion is born. True compassion is not an effort. It isn't a virtue you perform because you should. It's what naturally flows when you see that there is no boundary between yourself and the rest of life. When you no longer say, that's their pain, because you know at last that it's also yours. You see, once you stop being somebody, you can love anybody, and you do, without trying. Love ceases to be an act and becomes a state of being. It's as natural as breathing, as effortless as light shining from the sun. The sun doesn't say, I must illuminate that flower over there. It simply shines, and everything touched by its light begins to bloom. Now, some people misunderstand compassion. They think it means taking on the suffering of the world, wearing it like a badge of goodness. But that, you see, is still the ego, the hero of its own tragedy. Real compassion doesn't seek to fix or to save. It simply sees. It looks upon the world with clear eyes and a soft heart, knowing that every struggle, every mistake, every burst of laughter is part of the same play. You begin to sense that even those you once called enemies are just masks worn by the same consciousness, masks you yourself have worn in 1,000 different lifetimes, in 1,000 different moods. You recognize the divine mischief in it all. And rather than judgment, there arises a kind of gentle amusement. Compassion, in this way, carries humor, not cruel laughter, but the laughter of understanding. You see, it's impossible to hate anyone once you realize they're caught in the same dream you were, the dream of trying to be someone. So you don't lecture people about awakening. You don't run around shaking them by the shoulders saying, wake up. No. You simply live awake. You let your stillness do the talking. You let your kindness ripple outward without agenda. The fragrance of awareness spreads itself without words. Now, there's another paradox here. Compassion may lead you to engage with the world, to help, to serve, to create, but you no longer carry the burden of results. You understand that life doesn't need your anxiety to heal. You do what feels right in the moment, and then you let it go. Your actions are sincere but light, like footprints in sand washed away by the next wave. And this compassion, this effortless love, has no opposite. It embraces the cruel and the kind, the wise and the foolish, the sinner and the saint, because now you see that it's all the same current moving through different forms. You are not loving others, there are no others. You are loving yourself in disguise. That is the paradox. The moment you realize there is no self, love becomes infinite. And so, you find yourself walking through life with open hands. You give without pride, receive without guilt, and forgive without hesitation, because the one who used to keep score is gone. The game is still played, but the tension has vanished. Compassion doesn't mean you let the world trample you. It means you can say no with the same love as yes, because the essence of compassion is clarity, seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. You respond not out of reaction, but out of harmony. In this way, love becomes intelligent. It's not sentimentality. It's sanity. It doesn't drown in tears. It flows with wisdom. You may cry for the suffering of the world, but your tears will fall like rain that nourishes, not like storms that destroy. And so, you walk among people as one who knows. You laugh with them. You share in their sorrows. But somewhere in your gaze, there is that glimmer, that silent knowing, that everything, even the pain, is part of the same cosmic dance. This, my friends, is the paradox of compassion. When you vanish, love finally begins. And so, we come to the end, though, in truth, there is no end, only this endless unfolding of being that has never begun and will never finish. After all the seeking, all the surrendering, all the laughter and the tears, what remains is something so simple it almost feels absurd to name it. You are nothing, not nothing as in empty or meaningless, but nothing as in boundless, free, open the clear sky in which all clouds come and go. You see, what you truly are was never the mask, never the name, never the history. Those were fine disguises for the play, but they were never the actor. You are the space in which the play unfolds, the stage itself, invisible yet indispensable. And when this becomes clear, when you finally stop clutching at identity like a drowning man clings to a log, something extraordinary happens. The weight falls away. The struggle ends. You no longer have to defend, to prove, to achieve. You can simply be, to be no one, going nowhere, doing nothing. That, my friends, is the greatest liberation of all. Because when there is no one left to control life, life controls itself perfectly, effortlessly, as it always has. You wake in the morning, and the world rises with you, sunlight pouring through leaves, breath moving in and out, the body walking without anyone directing it. The ordinary becomes miraculous because there is no longer anyone standing between you and it. There is no self to translate experience into meaning. There is only the raw immediacy of this sound, this light, this heartbeat. And in that simplicity, you find peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace that comes from realizing there was never a war to begin with. Now, this kind of freedom can be unsettling to others. They'll say, "You've changed. You don't care anymore." But it's not that you don't care, it's that you've stopped caring personally. Compassion flows more freely now, but it's not owned by anyone. It's like the wind, it moves where it must, and you no longer claim to be its author. Some will find your calm disturbing, your silence threatening. They will project onto you their own discomfort with stillness. But you understand. You've been there. You know that the ego fights for its existence even as it fades, like a candle flickering before dawn. So you let people be. You don't try to wake them. You don't argue, don't preach. You simply live quietly, gently, radiantly, because now you understand that awakening cannot be given. It can only be recognized. Your very presence, unassuming and light, becomes the invitation. You are no longer trying to pull others into enlightenment. You are simply shining, and those who are ready will find warmth in that light. You see, being nothing doesn't mean absence, it means presence without resistance. The kind of presence that moves like water around rocks, that bends without breaking, that loves without owning. You walk through the world like a breeze, through trees, touching everything, grasping nothing. And naturally, this brings you back to laughter, that deep cosmic laughter that began when you first saw through the illusion. Because what could be more delightful than realizing that the entire drama of human existence was a magnificent dream, that all along you were never trapped, never broken, never separate. The wave returns to the ocean and discovers it never left. The self dissolves. And what remains is the laughter of God through the mouth of man. And so you live not as a someone trying to be spiritual, not as a seeker searching for truth, but as truth itself, quietly playing at being human. You chop wood, carry water, make tea, watch sunsets, and none of it means anything in particular. Yet everything shines. You are nothing, and in being nothing, you have become everything. The dance goes on, the dream continues. The universe breathes itself through you, and you smile not because you've achieved enlightenment, but because you finally stopped pretending that you weren't it already. You, my friends, have come home, not to a place, not to an idea, but to the pure, unshakable freedom of being no one at all. And in that freedom, life at last begins to live itself effortlessly, eternally, beautifully.